Well, as the next phase of Israel's offensive in Gaza begins, Israeli forces say that they're hitting hundreds of underground targets. According to the IDF, dozens of Hamas operatives who were hiding out in Gaza's tunnels network were killed in a strike overnight. Hamas is also believed to be using the tunnels to hide hostages. So Major Mike Lyons is joining us now for more analysis on this. He's a military analyst and a retired U.S. Army major. And it is always great to talk to you because I always end up smarter. But this seems like such a challenge, right? Israel has begun the ground invasion. They warned that this was going to happen. It's not looking like what we thought it was going to look like. Right. What is the strategy here?
Israel is fighting this completely on their own terms, right? So we thought that, so did Hamas, they thought that they were going to put 10,000 troops in the north and 20,000 troops in the south and have some large-scale conventional force that was going to go in and surround and maybe have it over in 72 hours or something. That's not what's happening. What Israel is doing is fighting it unconventionally, but conventionally at the same time. So what does that mean? Hamas fights unconventionally. They're in tunnels. They use civilians as shields. They are committing war crimes. As we speak, everything goes. Israel now is going to decide, what they've decided to do is take their strength of tunnels and take how they fight the battle and flip it on its head and go against them. So now the ground incursion has started, but it's in very small pieces. Somewhat raids. Raids are small unit tactics that come across the border, kind of punch the enemy in the face, gather intelligence, and in some cases retrograde. Now, it looks like they're staying, but they're gathering intelligence on where those tunnels are, and they're figuring out where they can hit deeper beyond the tunnel in order to close it down and make the tunnel collapse and really trap Hamas in their own things. So the bottom line is Israel's fighting a war that Hamas didn't think that Israel kind of had the guts to fight on some level, because for them to do this, it's going to be slow, methodical, but it's going to protect Israeli forces.
The two things that struck me, Mike, one was that for all this talk about how important technology will be in changing the landscape of the battlefield of the future, the reality is, as we've seen time and time again, wars are fought conventionally with blood and sweat and loss of life, enormous loss of life. So the question becomes, how does Israel do that to mitigate the loss of life for the IDF, but also we've had deep conversations about the rules of engagement and the rules of war that Israel needs to follow. We know that Hamas is a terrorist organization, and they will not follow anything that the Geneva Conventions or any rules of engagement that have existed for hundreds of years between militaries. But Israel now is being accused of committing war crimes without people understanding what the definition of war crimes and genocide, the legal definitions are. How do they mitigate the risks to civilians in doing what we're talking about?
So a couple of things. First of all, they're going to protect their forces by putting them in armored vehicles and only put them in situations where they know they're going to have a high chance of survivability. But what they've done is they've told civilians that if you're north of that Wadi Gaza, you need to exit to the south. They've drawn a line that said, if you're in that area that we're going to attack, you're a combatant. And that's what they're going to do, and they're going to continue to attack. Now, there might be some civilians that will still be there. There's just no way. You look in history, when a conventional force decides to fight conventionally against an unconventional force like this, look at Vietnam, look at Afghanistan, the victor is normally the unconventional force. Israel wants to win, so for them to want to win, they're going to stretch that limit as to what they're going to attack, and they're going to attack again disproportionately. They're not just going to see if there's a terrorist in a building. That whole building is going. There might be civilians in that building, but that they're going to say that that's a casualty of war.
But they're also trying to get their hands on these hostages. They don't want hostages dead either.
No. That is probably the thing that's weighing in the mind of the commanders the most. And in a lot of ways, these raids are trying to gather intelligence on where those hostages are. That is the secondary mission. If you look at what the Prime Minister said and what the Minister of Defense has said, the secondary mission is the hostages, but the primary mission is to defeat Hamas. And so from a soldier's perspective, that's really what it comes down to. There might be rescue missions where they think they can get hostages out, and unfortunately, we've seen it again in history, those hostages are killed. It's done by accident. But I don't think it's going to stop them from continuing their mission of destroying the tunnels and taking this very slow and methodically to protect Israeli forces and then also defeat Hamas.
Going back to the United States experience in Vietnam with the creation of elite units that were meant to go into tunnels where the Viet Cong were hiding, and apparently some of the tunnels, I mean, I visited when I was in Vietnam. You got a chance to go into some of them. I don't even know if they were if they were as elaborate as the ones that I've seen images of, where they had hospitals and all sorts of things within those. This was in the 1960s and 70s, so presumably it's much the same here in Gaza. But what kind of as a soldier does it take to, because even those guys who came back from Vietnam said it was the scariest, and they were trained to do that. What kind of a soldier does it take to go into those types of tunnels, and what kind of training do you need?
Tremendous courage, and this tunnel system is elaborate. It's not, those ones in Vietnam were somewhat ad hoc. They were put together, and in some ways they're done expeditiously. Those tunnel rascals that they were called were designed to kind of get in there because they could flush an enemy out quick. This is going to be different. These tunnels are elaborate. They're connected. There's communications inside. There could be booby-trapped. And I think that I don't think Israel's necessarily going to attack forward into them unless they're confident that there's nothing there on the other side. You brought up the point about technology. This is where Israel's going to bring what technology it can to the battlefield to try to get an advantage there. But again, when you're fighting an unconventional force, it's difficult to do that. They try to drag you down to their level, right? They're better at being, unconventional. They're better at being, creating war crimes and all those kinds of things. Israel's going to do whatever it can, but I don't necessarily see frontal assaults into those tunnels. They're going to attack them in depth and attack them in such a way that they're going to close them off. They're going to take Hamas's advantage and, again, flip it on its head. One
last thing, Mike, before you go. What was always interesting to me when I was way back in the 1980s in ROTC, we would go when we did our final summer at Fort Bragg before our commissioning, we trained in a woodland experience, right? And the idea, I think, was that, well, we fought a war in Vietnam that was we were in heavily forested areas, jungle environments. That's what we're training the soldier of tomorrow to do. In the last 30 or 40 years, that has completely been upended. We haven't fought, I don't think any armies have fought any type of wars like that. So given what we're seeing now, this is urban warfare. What are militaries, including ours, thinking about for the future?
It's had a renaissance, especially what happened with U.S. forces in Fallujah in Iraq. The Israeli forces have always trained at this. They have a training site that's close to the Gaza border there that they've trained at. But it's had a renaissance because that's where they believe that the conflict will be. Look at the urban warfare that's taking place in Ukraine. If, God forbid, something happens inside of Taiwan, that's what will be another kind of an urban fight. So the kind of the days of the large formations across deserts within World War II or the Desert Storm are probably over. And the urban war is much more difficult. It requires much more material, much more courage, much better leadership, and it's something that we train for every day now.
Major Mike Lyons, always great, as Anne Marie says, to have you, because we always get a little smarter afterwards. We appreciate it.